Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is an additional part two I decided for myself that I wanted to do anyway. A few days ago, I made a video where I deconstruct or comment a video of Stefan Molyneux, which deals with UPB, called Ethics is Only Two Things. And because the video I made, I actually got a third through it and finished how much I wanted to do. And it ended up having not streamed about the last 2/3 of the video, which was like, I hate when that happens, right? But the point is actually that if I'm deconstructing a video here, I don't need to stream it. I can record it locally and then upload it afterwards. That there might be something going wrong anyway. You can never know. But it seems that at times there's a small problem with my Wi-Fi router, which I don't know actually how to solve. It might have something to do with automatic changing of channels or your portals or whatever it's called. I don't know, but selecting one specific portal, might end up being a very bad choice. So you will have, hiccups in the stream anyway. So I'm the kind of guy, I let the router figure out what to do. I'm not going to try to fix something I'm not really sure how to fix, right? Not just, twisting around with the knobs and hope it goes well, right? So instead, I'm going to remake that part of it which went missing, mostly because one of my dear fans, sorry, one of my dear listeners, Eincrow, mentioned that, oh damn, it went missing. So I'm like, I don't want to disappoint my listeners, right? And I thought that as far as I remember, there were some good things in what the comments I made, and it seems like I'm just going to sort of try to find a good way to place myself in the picture here. Okay, never mind. But I'm going to go to minutes 3:30, I think it was, and start from there, and then. So it will be a part two of this. So you have to, start with the first one to get an idea where we are, and then I'm sort of heading into it here, right? Okay, let's jump in.
So I was thinking about this, and something that I've taken for granted for many years, which I should sort of unpack and explain to y'all, is arguing the opposite position. So when I went to school, I went to university, and even in high school, we were expected to, I don't think this is really the case anymore, but we were expected to be able to argue both sides of a position. So the famous BIRT, BERT, be it resolved that, right? And that's your...
Just stopping here. I wonder why that's so important. But isn't it most important that you can argue for the position you find to be correct? Why do you need to argue for the incorrect position also? Or isn't it just that too? It's just you think this, I think this, and I can switch over and be the other guy, and we can switch job. We can switch personalities almost, like, right? Why would that be important? I'm like, when I am philosophizing, which I'm sort of doing without really, I'm not sitting down saying to myself, I'm going to sit down now and I'm going in my Zen zone and I'm focusing and philosophizing. That's not how I do it. It's just, my everyday is just philosophy. When I make a cup of coffee, I'm, grinding my coffee, and then I'm thinking of something meanwhile, or listening to some podcast or something, and then an idea pops up or something like that, right? So why do if I come up with an idea of how things work in my mind, so to say, which is sort of thinking about thinking, which is sort of my low down and dirty definition of philosophy. Why would I say, okay, I think it's this way. Now I'm going to, because I went to a school or college or something that told me I should be able to argue for the opposite. Why would I want to do that, right? I wouldn't want to do that. I can see that you might want to say, well, is this the only way I can see it, right? Or are there other ways to see it than this, right? Is this the only... am I missing out something? Am I just jumping to conclusions, sort of, right? I should have a broader sense of things. Yeah, I need to mold this over to see if there's some other way that is even better, something like that. But it's not necessarily also that there is this way and the opposite way, right? It's like this black and white thinking, which is something I pointed out in another recent video, that he's always everything is, I'm over here and there's somebody on the opposite side, right? It's like everything in his philosophy is based on this notion that there are me and then those opposite, right? It's not like we are sort of rolling down a hill and finding the best solutions to philosophy, and we might go a little this way or a bit that way. No, it's trench warfare. I'm over here and you're over here, and I have to convince my acolytes that I'm right, and we are fighting against those over there, right? So in order for me to understand whether I'm right, I have to understand what they're doing over in the other trench. I don't like to think that way. I don't like to be a part of my philosophy mentality, right? I think somebody calls this a steel man, that it's sort of a modern kind of argumentation tactic or technique, right? That you should be able to argue the opposite or another person's argument, maybe even, right? In order to understand whether or not, in order to figure out how well you understand that. Maybe it's a bit like, Einstein, who said, if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it. It may be sort of a little bit like that, right? So if you can explain the opposite stance sufficiently, you might always also be able to understand your own. But it's just sort of a convoluted way of getting to philosophy. I don't care about, whatever, what did Aquinas think about religion? I don't use religion in philosophy because I think that philosophy is opposed to religion, and for good reasons, right? I can see that maybe there are some psychological things that keep you in a certain camp, so to say. And by trying to argue the other camp, you might figure out you actually don't have that good arguments for your so-called stance, right? But that's why you don't argue in this kind of midstream way. You go back to the basics. You start with your fucking reduction base of your metaphysics, and then you work your way up, right? So you don't have to argue for other people, right? Because if you have to argue for the other one, if you think you are right, why would you argue for somebody that is contradictory to that? Because you have argued from the basics of metaphysics, and it seems to stick together all the arguments all the way up to applied ethics, right? So why would you? I'm not saying it's necessarily a destructive or useless endeavor to try to do that, but it's not like, I feel like it's more like, when I've seen it used in discussions, it's more like it gives the person who actually has that approach or that stance an opportunity to bring you down because you can't explain it sufficiently, and then they're going to say, no, you don't understand what I'm saying, right? You try to steelman me, but you can't do it, right? Right, something like that. That's sort of a sophist trick, right? So I wouldn't fall for that, right? And another thing is, if I have an argument, I want to be the person who argues for that argument. I don't want somebody else who's possibly don't understand it trying to tell everybody what it is, right? I mean, it's sort of weird, right? Why would I ask somebody else to tell me how my stance is? I would want to do it myself. God damn it, right? So I don't understand. I understand the approach, but I think it's ripe for sophistry, right? So just be careful.
Arguments. Can you argue both sides of the argument? The pen is mightier than the sword. The sword is mightier than the pen. You have to be able to make both arguments. And when I was taking a pretty brutal course on the Protestant Reformation in university, I was expected to be able to make, say, Martin Luther's arguments with great precision and advocate them very strongly.
Why would you want to spend your time doing that? You're not a fucking priest, are you? You're a philosopher, or at least that's what you say. Why are you going much into? Who gives a crap? Right? Well, what some religious guy said 400 years ago. Who cares? Right? Who cares? I mean, it's more like it feels like sophist training to me, right? You should be able to argue anything that could be. It would soon be possible for you to sort of switch over, become a sophist, right? Because you're actually better at grabbing whatever opinion that fits your agenda, right? Rather than sticking to your philosophy and try to explain to everybody else how you're thinking, right? So I don't buy this at all, right? I would actually advise not to try to do this because it's sort of don't fall for anybody trying to ask you to steel man their argument, right? It's like it's almost like begging other people to make a fool of yourself, right? So, I mean, if you're very good at arguing for the opposite stance of what you're thinking, what did you actually spend your time on? Did you spend your time on finding out good philosophy? Or did you find out, okay, I have this argument, now I have to figure out the opposite argument and I have to become good at arguing for that? Why would you spend your time on that? So it's kind of, if you're very good at arguing for the opposite or something like that, there's something wrong. There's something, you have not spent your time wisely, right? It's a sort of an indirect sign that you are tending more to sophistry than to philosophy, in my opinion, right?
So being able to argue the opposite position, if you've read or listened to the book I wrote, called the novel Almost, I argue, I mean, there's actually a very sort of fiery debate in the middle where I argue both sides of the equation, or take both sides of the argument. And I mean, really, that's what novels are, is everybody has their own perspective, their own preferences, their own view of the world.
Yeah, but philosophy is not a novel, right? A novel is something different. There you have to make a conversation or something like that. And then you have to sort of figure out, both sides and make it sound like there is two sides to it, right? But that's not philosophy, right?
Then you have to convincingly inhabit those in order to be able to create compelling characters. Otherwise, they're just kind of like cliches or whatever, the conveniences. So when it comes to UPB, I guess an approach going forward that could be useful, I think I'll start deploying it. I've done it in the past, but I haven't really formalized it as a sort of strategy, is if someone can't argue for the case, in a sense, there's no point arguing the case for them. So if somebody is interested in UPB, has maybe read the book or some articles or some presentations, and then what they do is they come and they say, I have issues with UPB, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. Then I think a useful strategy, and not just for UPB, but for other things too, is to say, okay, make the case for UPB so I can understand how well you understand the argument. Make the case for UPB. Now,
but understanding the argument is not the same as making the case, is it? making the case is more like courtroom sophistry than making the argument. I can tell you sort of in pretty short form maybe what the sort of core arguments in the book is. That's not the same as making the case, right? Making the case also reeks of sophistry, right? How do I make the case? How do I present things so people get convinced about it, right? So he's always sort of balancing between this sort of the neutral argument compared to making the case. So it's very obvious to me after all these deconstructions of his video recently and so on, that to him it's about making the case, right? And whatever you need to bring in without blowing your cover completely, right? In order to make the case, that's what he's going to bring, right? So now he has one approach for how to force feed UPB into people, right? It's only two arguments. What's the title? It's only two things, which is also a very weird kind of term, things. I'll just put this down here. So, two things. Ethics is not a thing, right? It's and also the title of the video on the website is ethics is only two arguments, I think. So he's equating arguments and things, right? It's also very weird, right? And it is also a sign that, I mean, why the heck would I make an argument? Why would I make your argument when your argument is contradictory or nonsensical from the thumbnail in the video and the title of the video, right? You call it two things in the thumbnail and you call it two arguments in the title of the video, right? So that's ridiculous. Why would I spend my time on that when you're not even consistent in the description of your ethics? You're using 5 words, right? And one of them is wrong, is 20% wrong, right? Ethics is only two things, right? 5, and one of them is, one place you call it things, another one you call it argument, right? That's stupid, right? Why would I, and he calls it UPB is two arguments. That's the name of the video. So I guess it's more than, it's like for him, the words and the philosophy and the arguments are being rigid and following a well-defined use of words and so. It doesn't matter. It's just about getting people to understand I'm right because I wrote it, right? It's right. It's only two things. It's only two arguments. Don't read the book, actually. Just listen to me and accept when I say that it's only two things and it's all that important and everything is solved, right? So it's like he's winding back from his sort of attempt to be a rigid philosopher, writing books and, arguing and all that. And now it's sort of, just remember it's only two things, right? So he has nothing left than a small video here where he says, it's only two things, right? And so equating the words things and argument, right? And equating ethics and UPB, which is not this, it's all kind of ridiculous, right? It's kind of ridiculous how hard it is for him to realize the shit doesn't work, right? It doesn't work if you now going on 15 years repeatedly have to try to sort of convince your own argument. People don't understand your fucking argument, right? They keep asking you, but what about this and what about that and what about preference and what about, universality and objectivity, all this. They keep asking these questions and you keep trying to argue it. Wow, it would be a good idea before you ask other people to argue your position, you are actually able to argue your own position after 15 years. And nobody would be confused, or very few, right? a guy who only read the book yesterday or something would have a few questions maybe, right? Haven't seen some of your older videos or anything like that. But you will soon, he will soon be going strong on UPB, right? But that's not the case. Nobody understands this, and for good reason. You can go and listen through my deconstruction of UPB, which basically describes in all necessary ways how badly argued. There's nothing there. There's nothing. They're just words, juggling words, and then saying, aha, therefore I have proven whatever, right? And it's not how ethics should work, in my opinion. Okay, it's like he has a way about him where he creates a sense of superiority. There's no way of getting, I mean, he has an air of superiority about him, right? He has an air of, I am the philosopher, right? It's you little people who are unable to understand my grand thinking, right? It cannot possibly be myself doing anything, that could be improved or anything like that. No. I'm just going to, shape-shift into whatever argument I need to bring on in order to stay with my own thinking and not challenge my own thinking, right? And he's brilliant sophist in this way that he can argue, 10 different ways for his UPB depending on the situation. But what I see is sort of a grandiose personality trying to avoid realizing that what he attempts to do has not succeeded. And it's not only because it's badly written or badly argued in the book, but because he has actually not solved anything. He has not solved anything. Otherwise, people would start to use it, and it's not. Otherwise, he must have the idea the whole world is crazy, or they just want to pull me down so they can, be hedonist or whatever, right? It can't be because it's me. I'm, pretending to be him, right? So this is never going to settle in any way. And I'm also wondering why he has been away from online making videos for going on 2 months now. This is an old video. It's from, I guess a year old or something like that, right? What the hell is he doing? It's unusual. I mean, maybe he has some kind of health problem or, whatever. I don't know. And I'm not going to fabulate about what is going on. It's just kind of weird that he's not, telling everybody what is going on. He's just pulling out old videos that haven't been put online before, and sort of to keep the kettle boiling, right? It's so there's other weird things going on, right? And I have a sense that he is sort of losing control of his narrative. It's like whenever there's someone who tries to, ask, good questions about, for instance, his UPB. It's like he gets annoyed and, lecturing or being patronizing, or you shouldn't, ask questions and something like that. It's like, is he sort of losing his religion? So I don't know. Well, let's see what happens in the future, right?
UPB is two things. It's two things, and that's it. One is UPB is a valid concept, universally preferable behavior.
UPB is a valid concept. I mean, just from that, he hasn't gone into explaining it yet, right? But after 15 years of trying to argue his ethics, he can't just say it's valid, right? The first argument of it can't be that it's valid, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Nobody should take that seriously. That's not how you do ethics, right? No, what he would need to do is go back, start from scratch, remove everything he has written and say, I'm starting on, free domain 2.0, and I'm starting with the basics of metaphysics and arguing all the freaking way up rigidly until he reaches a point where he has an understanding of metaphysics, an understanding of knowledge, an definition or, action, whatever approach he wants to take, of truth and objectivity and what it means to have morality or what entails ethics, and reach a moral principle of some kind, right? That's what you need to do. He can't just, this argument is right, therefore I'm right, sort of. I mean, it's disconnected from everything in the world, right? And then from that, he builds his argument, right? It's like, it shouldn't be taken seriously, because it's, even if he's not in a sophist mood in that sense, you shouldn't trust what he's doing, because he's not connected to anything, right? You can't take a step back. Okay, so it's based on that. Okay, I'm going to read that. That is based on that before that, and that before that, and all the arguments all the way down to the reduction base, right? You can't do that with anything in and you would have to you listen to 4,000 podcasts and read 10 books and then deconstruct that and try to piece it together and to figure out, and then it would be your version of his philosophy, and then you say, no, that's not what I mean, whatever, and then you're lost, right? So it's all these 200 philosophy balls thrown into the air, and he's grabbing them as he sees fit and throwing them up and kicking them down and whatever, right? And you're sort of trying to get a hold of what the hell he's talking about, right? That's not how you do philosophy. You take one ball at a time, put it on the shelf and say, this is how I understand this next ball, and so on. So there's a systematic approach and a rigid approach to it, right? You can't just throw all the arguments up in the air and say, I solved the problem, right?
Valid concept. And once somebody is saying UPB is right or wrong, then they're saying there's a universal standard called truth or accuracy or consistency, which arguments that claim to...
There's also there is truth, there is consistency. Where? What color, what smell, what sound does consistency have? Okay, so where does that consistency come from? Comes from your experience. Somebody has to experience it, and somebody has to express it in order for somebody else to tell that there's... So it's your subjective experience of whatever you call consistency. It's not defined, it's not explained, it's not reference to any kind of metaphysics or anything like that. It's just floating in the air, and the arguments are just, right? It's bullshit. It's not philosophy, right? There might be some philosophy in his thinking, but how he presents it is not philosophical. So just be aware, right?
Manifest truth should conform to truth and consistency and so on. So that's all. UPB is like, okay, first you got to get that there is UPB, and that's embedded in the...
There is, well, is another term for existence, right? An elephant is because I can say that's an elephant, so it exists. That elephant exists, and that elephant is a being, is existence, right? So it's just like, but you can't use that term for ethics because it's based on existence and derived from existence, or an adjustment of your experience of how things move around in reality and how they should move around instead of how they do move around, or something like that, right? So, but that morality or ethics doesn't exist. The ethics is sort of the philosophy you do in order to arrive at the moral principle. And then applying the moral principle is sort of thought up from your thinking of ethics, right? So there's no is to it. And that's also the problem that Hume points out. There is no is to it. You can't refer to an is in morality. It's not existence, right? It's a description of how an individual wants the situation they're in to be, right? Or to stay and not become, right? But that's elephant and grass and a glass of juice or helicopter, right? It's not like there's a morality, there's good, there over there is evil, right? That's not how it works, right? So you're conflating these words, these terms. I mean, yes, we have to use the language as it's, has been developed through the ages and so on. That's what we have to work with, right? But then you should be careful not to conflate or equivocate terms that are very important in either in knowledge or in metaphysics, right? You can't say ethics is, right? Or you should be careful, right? Ethics is a thing, it's only two things. Well, things about, things are sort of in the metaphysical realm, right? Ethics is after epistemology, right? So it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of philosophy. So, he doesn't seem to care about it. So he doesn't seem to care to understand how people would receive his presentations. He's so focused. This is my, I'm hell-bent on these two arguments, right? And I'm just slamming words together, and that's all I need to do because I'm fantastic, right?
Very process of debating, right? It's number one. And number two, universally preferable behaviors cannot self-contradict. I mean, when I boil it down to that, it seems like kind of dumb in a way, but that's all it is.
So behaviors cannot contradict, but you have to understand, you have to explain, and he has never done that really. I have tried several times in my deconstructions and comments to his videos about particularly UPB, explain how I see the difference between behavior and actions. Actions are an observation of actual objects and how they move, relative to each other, right? And the action is that change, you could say, in my body, that the influence my body makes on those external objects, or those objects that are external to my body, which are not a part of my body. Outside my body, you could say, right? Metaphysically. But that's based on an axiom, also the outside thing. But that we'll not go so deep into it, right? Read my book when it's finished. But when you make an action, you sort of, what's it called? Wiggle your body some way or another, right? I'm moving this. If I have this this juice here, right? I'm moving this hand, and the action is I'm influencing this object called my glass of juice, right? And so it's my body exerting some change in the objects, or how I'm not changing the objects, I'm changing the what's it called, relation between them, so to say, right? And the action is the change that my body made to those objects in that situation, right? But if I'm saying behavior, what would that be? Well, that would be some kind of interpretation of what I'm actually trying to do with that action, right? If I do this, you can describe it as you can see I'm influencing this object, I'm putting it close to my mouth, and I'm sticking, it's sort of moving it slightly into my mouth, and sort of, right? But you could also call it drinking, you could say, right? It's drinking, but the action itself would have to describe the objects, the plastic and the straw and the orange juice and so on, right? That's what I would have to, if I would describe the situation correctly. But that's not what I would do if I would say, well, what's the interpretation of what is going on? That would be drinking, right? That's at least a sufficiently useful way of describing it. There's nothing in it that says, well, it's obvious it's drinking. It's still your interpretation. It doesn't say anyway, you're not experiencing drinking, anything like that, right? It's just your interpretation. Your interpretation is only in your mind, right? Just because you have an interpretation of that doesn't mean you can get objectivity about that interpretation, because there is no object you're referring to. There is no drinking. There is the plastic and the straw and the juice and my mouth, or me, my head, my mouth, and whatever, right? There's no drinking anywhere. It's an interpretation. That's purely subjective. You can't get that to an objectivity, right? You could say you could agree on a subjective action and say, do we agree that that action could be classified as drinking? And you could agree maybe with somebody else. Fine. I mean, I won't challenge you on that. That's between you and some other person or some other persons. But the point I would get to is that there is no drinking in the experience. The drinking is an interpretation you make, and that is the behavior. Because the behavior tells you something about the value going on, right? Because the value of drinking is getting, what's it called when you're quenching your thirst, whatever, right? Quenching your thirst is drinking. Then you do drinking in order to quench your thirst. But drinking and quenching thirst are descriptions, they are interpretations of value and something like that, right? And they're completely different from actions, which are description of how objects move, right? But the point is, what you have access to is the actions or the descriptions of the objects involved in the actions. You don't have access to the interpretations other than you are making the interpretation. There's no empiricism connected with the interpretation, other than it's an interpretation of something that was based on empiricism. But that doesn't make your interpretation empirical, right? So that would be the same as saying that Santa Claus exists because I saw somebody in a red coat and a white beard and a funny hat, right? And saying that Santa Claus. Okay, so it's empirical Santa Claus. It's sort of that's the over interpretation of knowledge, in my opinion, right? And the point is, you can't get to reality by starting from the interpretations and saying, I am basing my morality or ethics on behavior. Well, behavior doesn't get you down the other way, right? You have to start with the plastic and the juice to get to behavior. You can't get from behavior to what is going on in the world, because behavior is terms for interpretations, right? So you can't go the other way. It's a one-way street from observation to interpretation and so on. You can't go from interpretation to observation, right? So this is just one of the point in my critique, right?
1, UPB is valid, and 2, UPBs can't self-contradict, because universality can't self-contradict. If something is universal, then it has to be consistent, because something cannot be both universal and self-contradictory at the same time.
No, but there's nothing that is universal in itself. You can't point to anything and say, aha, that's universal, right? If you have some moral rule, there's nothing in the moral rule that says it is, when you make a moral statement, then it's universal. It doesn't work that way, right? I mean, that's one of the problems, is you can't say that it's universal. You can say it, you can say whatever the fuck you want, but it's not going to become that way just because you say it is that way, right? If I have a record with Beatles, right? If I'm calling it Elvis, it does not start to sing Hound Dog or something like that, right? So whatever things are in reality, that's the way things are in reality, no matter what label you put on it, right? If it's a tuna, it's a can of tuna. If I started to call it pasta, it's still tuna, right? And if I refer to a moral statement, I can't just call it universal just because I want it to be universal, right? It has to be universal. But what does that mean, right? So it's like he's force-feeding terms and ideas and understanding into you. So I should approach it another way. When you have to force-feed understanding into people, right? That's an approach that is, I'm not going to accept somebody who says something different, right? This force-feed mentality is what is inevitably going to end up with, well, then I can shoot you, right? Which is a status in a video with a calling guy, when people don't conform to your morality, you shoot them, right? Which I pointed out in another short video recently. You can go watch that. So if you're force feeding, if you're forcing understandings into people, well, then you're going to get people shooting, right? That's the whole problem. You can't force feed philosophy into people. You can't force feed terms or understandings into people. You have to leave them to their own understanding. The best you can do is saying, well, I'm not going to interact with you, right? Right? Say, I'm not going to interact with you. Stay away from me, right? Or I'm going this way so I can get away from you, right? So just accept that I'm going away from you. Get away from me, right? So you don't have to accept anything. It's the other approach that Stefan Molyneux has. Well, I have to convince the whole world. I'm Jesus. I have to convince them, right? The little people don't understand how, the big thinking, and right? You can't do it that way. Okay.
In that a theory of physics can be both universal and self-contradictory at the same time. Universality is consistency, just...
No, but nothing is universal by its own accord. There's nothing that is universal. What object could be universal, right? Because the object is what you have. The objectification or the conceptualization of your reality, right? There's a table, there's a cloth on the table, there's my MacBook, there's a lamp, there's a paper, there's a book, and there's an old movie, Blu-ray, my juice, a window, a curtain, the kitchen over there, and a bowl of apples, and that's what there is. What is universal about it, right? And if you're going to talk about science, those are abstractions, right? Those are abstractions that you might agree with, but they're still abstractions, right? You can point to gravity, you can point to, electricity or whatever. These are concepts. These are the formulas and all that. These are generalized concepts, abstractions. I wouldn't call it concept. Generalized abstractions. And you call, that's universal. The scientific method is universal. No, it isn't. It's just a principle. Nobody has to follow it, right? Nobody's forced to. There's no force field that puts you into, using well, it might also be wrong. It might need some adjustment. So, right? So it's this universality. I don't get it, right? You have no way of knowing what is beyond your immediate experience, right? And even that immediate experience is your subjective conceptualization of that experience, right? You experience that elephant, but that doesn't mean that somebody else experiences it. It doesn't mean that they don't experience it either. You can only say, well, I experienced that fucking elephant, right? That's all I have to go with, right? Universality, well, if you have an outside world, right? If you have the inside-outside dichotomy, then what is outside your experience, you have no access to, right? You have your experience of that which is outside. So you don't even know what the hell is going on out there, right? You can only say, do you have a similar kind of experience as I have, right? That's all you can do. Yeah, I think I'm experiencing elephant. Okay, so far so good, right? So all this universality bullshit, I don't buy it.
Ideas, just as it is in matter and energy. So yeah, all UPB is, and everybody sort of sticks up on the first part, because the first part requires introspection, and it requires a higher level of thinking in that you have to pause and see what it is that you're doing when you insist that UPB be proven or be valid or true, or however people are going to phrase it. You have to pause in the same way that it's easy to argue against the comprehensibility of language, but what you have to do is pause and stop and self-reflect and say, okay, what assumptions do I have to make in order to be able to argue?
I have to stop and self-reflect? Oh, it's sophistry, right? It's sophistry. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with my theory. You should search yourself. If there's something you don't understand, it's you that something wrong, right? You should try to see the other argument on the opposite side, right? You might research yourself because you might find that I'm right, right?
incomprehensibility of language. Given that I'm using language to argue for the incomprehensibility of language, that's a self-detonating argument. And so everybody wants to sort of jump
but
over.
then also these very contradictory that sending an email to people and saying email doesn't function, something like that, or language doesn't exist, or there's no such thing as language, or using sounds that could be interpreted as languages, right? No, I get that. But that's not how things work in my everyday, right? It's not that I'm going down to the grocery store and, trying to buy a bag of apples, and then the guy at the counter says, "These are pears." No, you can't contradict. It's apple. You can't contradict it. So, that's not what's going on in reality, right? So you're trying to argue for this. You're saying there's universality, and then you're saying it can't. Your statements can't contradict because of that universality you just brought in, as if that's obvious to everybody, right? So you're sort of basing your arguments on two arguments that would work together if they could actually be argued for, right? But you can't argue for universality. It's just a pipe dream, right? It's like, I want that to be universality, and therefore I can go and argue that there can't be contradictions in this universality, right? I don't know how to exactly make an analogy or something like that, or a metaphor, maybe an analogy. But it's like he's taking two artificial arguments, you could say, and then comparing them and seeing, okay, these two artificial arguments don't work together. Therefore, I can tell you how to go about your day, right? It's just a bit of a stretch.
The self-reflection part, or the observing of what it is that you're doing. It's an analogy I made, I don't know, like 15 years ago, that if you're engaged in and I did this way back. I talked about this when I was unpacking my age 23 manifesto at freedomainnft.com. But I used to actually engage in mail, like physical written mail debates with a wide variety of people. This was like carrier pigeon internet 101. This is back before there really was an internet, even before the emergence of message boards, really. I put an ad in the paper, got a P.O. box, and mailed out a free copy of the Rationalist Manifesto, and then I had a couple of dozen people debating and arguing about it.
The Rationalist Manifesto? What the hell is that? I haven't heard of that. Is that his? Just going to... Can you say? I'm just going to see if I can find it online, maybe. Hang on. Yeah, it seems. So it's a... I'm not going to go through it, but I'm trying to find it. So, and maybe I'm going to sort of consider making a video about it, or maybe not. Stefan Molyneux, The Rational Manifesto, my response at age 23 to the Communist Manifesto. So it's sort of, it has at least 18 pages long, right? Okay, so this is a video. Maybe it is. Oh, it's an NFT. It's some kind of DApp, decentralized app. Okay, so I can't tell it, but the headlines are theory, epistemology, ethics, society, conclusion, application, the economy, inflation. Okay, so it's sort of political and economics, and that would make sense if it's a rational manifesto in opposition to the Communist Manifesto. So, okay. I'll let it be, right? Apropos, Get Back, the Beatles movie, which I just made a little video about in Danish, which is, I'm an old Beatles fan from way back. I remember actually the last years of Beatles as a very small child, listening to them in the radio, and my aunt living on the first floor of our farm. When I was very small, was a huge Beatles fan, listened to Beatles back then. I remember the Let It Be and the Long and Winding Road and these Get Back. I remember from back then listening or hearing her playing them, right? So I can just, with a little of goodwill, right? I can claim that I was, living in the area. I was alive during the area of the Beatles, but I was 4 years old when they broke up, right? So, let's head on.
Engage in debates with them by mail, in the same way I guess people used to play chess by mail. And of course, if somebody were to write to me and argue that mail never gets delivered to the right address, then they would love to drag me into that debate and have me ignore the basic fact that they were writing to me to argue that mail never gets sent to the right address. Now, of course, they would have to assume that mail gets sent to the right address in order to write to me. But people don't want to sort of slow down and get into slow motion, strolling through Jello.
But what is the level of the intellect of the people listening to you, right? You have to explain that if you write a letter to somebody and you're saying, well, letters are just a figment of your imagination or something like that. Is that the level you have to explain to people, right? Is that the level you have to argue from after 15 years of philosophy and arguing for ethics? It's sort of, you have to wind down to the absolute basics of understanding of when something is a contradiction or something like that, right? People don't work their every day trying to weed out contradictions, right? It's not that they say, okay, that's my car, but I have to find out whether or not it's a contradiction of my car. And so that's not how you work in your everyday, right? You're just bringing in these kind of contradictory statements in order to sort of, in a sophist way, validate your understanding of universality. Yeah, you can make them, but they are nonsensical. So what? That's not my everyday. If I'm standing somewhere, I need to make a moral judgment. What do I use universality for? And what do I use, a contradiction for? And do I need to bring my own moral principle? And did I have to work that through UPB before I got there, right? Because also one point that I don't remember if I pointed that out in the first part of my video to this one, right? But his ethics is a system of ethics that checks whether or not a moral statement or a moral principle or something like that is valid or not. And that validation is jogging it through these two sort of, it must be universal and it can't be contradictory, sort of. And then it's okay, right? So the thing is, he should say that, well, if you want to make a moral judgment, you have to find some kind of moral principle. And that principle, you need to run that through my UPB to check out whether or not it's okay before you can do anything, right? Just stop everybody, find a moral principle, run it through UPB, and then you can go out into the world, right? Otherwise, I mean, nobody has used UPB before he presented it, right? And he should say that you need to use UPB in order to figure out if your moral principle is okay. And if it's okay, fine, you can go and use it. But if it's not okay, you need to find something else. And if that doesn't work, then you find something third, and so on, right? Until you go out in the world and do whatever. Otherwise, you might be doing something that is immoral. If you have a moral principle you're working from, but you haven't checked it with UPB, well, you actually don't know whether or not it's functional, or it's immoral, or has some immoral aspect of it, right? And what he does is he just bring in the NAP, the non-aggression principle, and say it checks out, right? So he's bringing in somebody else's principle. He hasn't even figured out a principle himself. And this is also something that bugs me a lot, right? Is that he's trying to create his own system of ethics, right? All the ethics through the years, useless, right? He has to make his own system of ethics, right? That's a red lamp you should watch out for, right? And then he doesn't go and create a moral principle from that, but he creates a system with which you can check moral statements, like murder is wrong, right? So if murder is wrong, okay, it's okay, murder is wrong. And then what happens then, right? There's nothing. It doesn't go any further than that. Okay, murder is wrong, okay, but how the hell do I avoid murder? I don't want to be in a situation where I say, aha, I'm being murdered now, right? Thank you, Stefan Molyneux, you could tell me when I'm getting murdered. I don't want to get murdered, right? So there are huge problems with his ethics, right? It's extremely complicated. And it's very badly argued, and this core argument in it is a syllogism, which is actually not a syllogism, even if it pretends to be a syllogism. And it's so full of, contradictions, and it doesn't have the right structure to be a syllogism and so on. And this is the core argument of his book, right? It's a piece of junk, right? Go listen to my deconstruction of UPB, which is about a month old, a year old or something like that. And there are all sorts of other deconstructions I've made of his video dealing with UPB, just like this one, right? Okay.
Looks at what it is that they're doing when they argue. So that's it for sort of UPB. Number one, UPB is a valid concept, and anybody who debates and argues with you and all of that has automatically accepted that. And two,
so you have accepted that if you are using language, let's say, right, you are making sounds that is an approach towards language and being understood, right? And if the statement in that language is there's no such thing as language, right? But that just points out it's a contradictory statement. It doesn't prove that there's any universality of any kind, right? It's sort of an edgelord case or a contradictory case of some kind that you say, and therefore there must be universality. No, that doesn't work, that argument, in my opinion, right?
Universally preferable behaviors can't be self-contradictory, right? So, as I sort of said a billion times, and you know this one, like stealing cannot be UPB because stealing is the unwanted transfer of property.
Oh, unwanted. But you cannot experience unwanted, except for your own unwanted, right? But the point of morality is avoiding getting to the unwanted, right? I don't want an unwanted murder imposed on me, right? I don't want an unwanted stealing or any other kind of unwanted. Well, I don't want to be in a situation where I have to say that's unwanted. I want to avoid unwanted. How do I do that? Well, the way you argue, Stefan Molyneux, is by saying, well, when you get to that point, it's unwanted. Yeah, but I don't want to be in the unwanted situation, right? So you are using the situation I don't want to be in order to argue for where it should be instead, right? But when you're getting to, if you're in a sort of utopia where everything always works according to a moral principle, there is no unwanted situations, and there's no unwanted. So if it works, you wouldn't be able to point anywhere and say, hey, my morality works because that unwanted thing over there isn't there. Something like that, right? And if there are all these unwanted things, you need to be there in order to say, now I can be moral because I can point to that unwanted. Well, then you're violating the whole idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to avoid the unwanted. And you need the unwanted to be there in order to say, that's immoral, right? You see the problem? You want to be able to go out in the world and say, that's immoral, and that's immoral, and that's immoral, right? But if it works, your moral principle, there is no unwanted, right? Okay.
But if stealing is UPB, then you must want to steal and be stolen from under all circumstances, at all times, in all locations. You must want to steal and be stolen from. But if you want to be stolen from, you're not stolen from. If you want your property to be taken away, then...
Yeah, but you can't experience what somebody else wants or don't want. Even if they say so. If you didn't say, if they say they don't want it, then this and that, right? You're saying they want it or they don't want it, right? That's a reference to some kind of inner experience in that person. You do not have access to that, right? You is screaming and yelling and being happy and being sad, whatever. That's some kind of experience of the external. That's not the experience inside, right? So you can't go with that. You can't make that argument. You can make it, but it's invalid. It's an invalid argument. You are claiming access to something you do not have access to. It's the wanting or not wanting of an individual which is not you, right? You do not have that. That person you are interacting with have their own understanding whether or not they want something or not. You have your own understanding of whether or not you want something or not. But you do not have access to what that other person want or want not, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, or no matter how good you are interpreting their actions as proving this or that or the other, right? And that is the fucking hurdle in ethics. You can't just say that you understand this, right? As if it's given to you. It's not given to you. Just throwing around words and make you think that you have access to something doesn't mean that when you're in reality, which is where things are going on, right? That you have access to other people's emotions, right? You don't. So you can't, it's an invalid argument, basically, right?
It's not taken away. I mean, you can't charge a garbage man for theft, right? If you put your garbage in a bag and put it in a garbage bin by the side of the road, you can't charge the garbage man with theft because you are saying, I want you to take this.
No, but it's just an implicit agreement, some sort of. Well, the garbage can is that box you'd empty as a garbage collector whenever you go. Yeah, right. Some nasty wife put your your Beatles collection into the garbage, and he drove off with your Beatles collection. No, you wouldn't blame the garbage collector. You would blame your wife for dumping your Beatles collection, right?
It's not theft. I mean, the garbage man comes into your house and takes property.
But how do you know that it's not theft, right? Is it an empiricism or is it an interpretation, right? You need to fucking understand this. It's an interpretation. You don't experience this is not theft, right? You don't. Because there's a built-in understanding of agreements and contracts and whatever you want, right? In order to make that understanding, right? But how do you know? It might be somebody stealing the garbage, right? So, and how do you know it's a garbage collector and not somebody pretending to be a garbage collector, right? So, and the garbage collector, how does he know that it's garbage and not something, the Beatles collection, how does he know? He doesn't know, right? So it's based on all sorts of, I believe this is what is supposed to happen in this case, right? But underneath this are some implicit contracts built in that makes you able, you think, to say this is stealing and this is not stealing, right? Okay, and what he then points to is, well, we need an authority to tell us whether or not it's stealing or not, right? It's an appeal to authority, and he wants to be that authority that come and say, well, this is not stealing, this is stealing, this is not stealing, right? You can't handle the truth, you can't handle little opinions, right? So.
Then that's theft. But if so if you want someone to take your property, and your garbage is your property, right? If you want someone to take your property, it's not theft. So that's it for UPB. It's just two sides of the coin. One is there is such a thing as universally preferable behavior. And two, universally preferable behaviors cannot be self-contradictory.
If my wife dumped my Beatles collection into the garbage, I don't want the garbage collector to take the garbage out, would I? I wouldn't want to. If I knew that it's in the garbage, but I can't get to it, she calls me in the work hours and say, "Well, I dumped your Beatles collection in the garbage, right?" And I see the garbage collector; he's coming to take it away. So I don't want him to take it, but he thinks I want it to take it. Can you see? There are all sorts of problems, and you can't just wipe them away and say, "No, the world is like this," right? You can't. It's a ridiculous argument. It's a ridiculous argument.
And that's it. But if people can't argue that, and I'm not saying that's a simple argument or it's just, you repeat it like some sort of mantra. Universally preferable behaviors are valid. Universally preferable behaviors cannot be self-contradictory, cannot contradict themselves. Okay.
It sounds like the 10 Commandments, right? The 2 commandments. But even if it was valid, or even if I said, well, I can't find any flaws in the argumentation, so I'm going to go with it. Okay, what do I do then, right? I have to find some moral principle. Okay, I have to run it through, say, is it universal and is it self-contradictory? Okay, it doesn't seem to can I just go out in the world and act accordingly? What about that person I'm going to interact with? What if they have a different moral principle? Whatever it is, the statement they're working from. Do I have to ask them about that statement, or can I just say, well, I don't care about your statement. I have my statement. It works. Stefan Molyneux says it works because he's Mr. Philosophy. So it's like, what are we dealing with, right? It's like, this is sort of a quarter way to acting in the world. And I'm just pointing out what I find of flaws, of flawed in the basic arguments. He's presenting these 2 arguments. He's presenting as a sort of validation of his ethics, right?
And all that you're saying is your behavior cannot contradict your argument, right? Because that's the big.
But what if I don't make an argument? What if I shut the fuck up? What if I mute? Do I have to make an argument before I can, right? And if let's say nobody's saying anything, right? In a situation, nobody's saying anything, and actions are performed. Nothing is contradictory in those actions. Those actions are those actions. It's only when somebody says, that's an apple, and I say, that's a pear. Aha, contradiction. It can't be both a pear and an apple at the same time. Who cares, man, right? It's the reality you have to refer to, not somebody making a statement somewhere, right? Then you could say, aha, that's so contradictory, something like that. Yeah, okay, so what? So what? I mean, it's like he's on another planet with this thing, UPB, right? He's in this cage where things make sense to him, right? And he can't convince anybody about it. Doesn't matter. I'm right because I need these two things that makes my world, make sense, right?
Empirical thing that ties the world to the idea. Your behavior cannot contradict your argument, which is back to the...
Of course it can. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it's a pointer that there's something wrong with you. You're a crazy person or something like that, right? But of course, a statement can contradict your behavior. If you're saying you're falling from the sky in a parachute, and you're saying, well, I'm drinking. I'm not sure it even contradicts what you're doing, but you're not drinking at least, right? You are falling to earth slowly, right? So there's no drinking, and so what? Okay, you made a statement. It's incorrect. Okay, so what? But where do I go with this, right? It's like there's no ethics there, right? There's no ethics. There's nothing. It's sort of fluffy words that sort of drift away, and okay, I'm left here with nothing, right?
no mail gets delivered to the right person. Your behavior is based upon the assumption that mail gets delivered to the right person. And if your behavior contradicts your argument.
But who says I'm making an argument? So mute people cannot be UPB compliant, something like that, right? Or if the recipient is deaf, they can't hear the argument, right? So there has to be expressed an argument for your thing to work. It seems completely ridiculous, right? So if you're making an action and you're mute, you can't make the statement that is going to confirm that action or that behavior, even as you say, you call it a behavior, even if that's an interpretation of an action. So that is even worse. But let's just say you can refer to an action and call it drinking or eating or whatever, right? If you can't make the statement, can't you work morally or what? Right? Well, if you're deaf, you can't even hear. You have to read it. If you're blind, also okay. I mean, deaf, dumb, and blind. Maybe that's a bit too much, right? The deaf, dumb, and blind kid in Tommy. Well, it's just it's simply too fluffy to work with, right? You have to go back to the foundations in order to work this out, and you have to come up with something that is better than this. This can't work, right? It simply can't work. You shouldn't take this seriously, even if there's something good in it. If there is, you can't relate it to anything in reality, and that's why it falls flat on its face, because you can't use it in your everyday. I wouldn't dare to use it or attempt to use it, because I wouldn't fucking know how to use it, right? And when I try to understand it, it feels like it's just words. So
then either your behavior is invalid or your argument is invalid. Now, because I'm an empiric...
Your behavior is invalid? What the hell is an invalid behavior? Is it an incorrect interpretation of your action you're talking about? So if I'm doing this, I'm saying I'm eating. You would say, oh, no. That's an incorrect behavior. You are drinking. You're not eating. It's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's like, oh man, right?
Behavior wins. Behavior wins. So if somebody says language is meaningless, then their behavior, in terms of what they're saying, their behavior, and the fact that they're engaging in a debate, their behavior always wins over the argument.
Why? Always, maybe that's an explanation.
In the same way that in science, experimentation always wins over the hypothesis or the conjecture or the theory or the scientific proposal. Always wins.
Okay, so there have to be some empirical reference. There has to be something that is empirical, but a behavior, as I told you, or as I explained in my understanding, is not something you can experience. You can only interpret it as such, right? That you tend to interpret the same thing as the same thing every time you do it. That doesn't mean that you know that this is cutting stone, that this is eating or drinking or whatever, right? It's an interpretation. What if this is, yellow stuff to put in your carburetor? Would it be drinking? I'm quenching my thirst. Yeah, maybe, but it's like, I don't like whenever there are fluffy things, fluffy boundaries or anything. No, it has to be fucking clear-cut understanding of what we're dealing with. Either it's the case or it's not the case, right? It shouldn't be up to interpretation, right? It shouldn't be up to interpretation whether or not that George Floyd guy was killed or he was something else, right? Or murdered, whatever term you want to put on, right? It shouldn't be up to interpretation. And another thing is, the guy's dead, right? That shouldn't happen. It's too late now. The guy's dead. It doesn't matter how much we discuss what happened. The fucking guy is dead, right? He shouldn't be dead. No matter what. People shouldn't die just like that, right? So it's too late now. No matter how you end up explaining this is what happened, that's what happened, this what happened, that's what happened. It's too fucking late, right? All after rationalization of what was going on to justify this person or that person or whatever, it's all bullshit, right? Because we don't want people to get killed just like that.
Always wins. In the same way that, I don't know if you've ever had this, I think it happens to everyone once in a while. You think you have $100 in your bank account, and then you go to your bank account and there's $50 in your bank account because you had some bill or whatever it is that you've forgotten about and they took the money out of your account. So then you have an idea. How much money do I have in my bank account? I have $100 in my bank account.
So the numbers on your computer screen, that's money. It's just some colors on the screen. That's not your bank account, is it? It's just these fluffy examples. I don't buy that. I'm not saying you're completely wrong or anything like that, but it's just talking down to me like that. If it says that it's not philosophy, right? It's not good philosophy, at least. It's just putting a damper on your peons, your acolytes. Yeah, the big guy is coming in to tell you about UPB. I saw something in the forum, people were discussing this and that. I have to clarify things. Listen, my congregation, this is how you should understand it, right?
You go to the ATM or log in or whatever. You got $50 in your bank account. That's your idea is not correct. And the empirical fact of the contents of your bank account is...
No, that's not an empirical fact. If you're logging in somewhere, you're not seeing your bank account. What is that actually, right? What is a bank account? That would be a fucking great question to ask. Is it just some numbers on your computer, right? You don't have control of anything here, right? It's not empirical. And that you see a photograph on the moon is not an empirical observation of the moon, right? A photograph of your so-called bank account is not your bank account. It's not empirical, right? It's
correct. So, because I'm a science-based, empirical-based guy, if you behave in a way that contradicts your argument, your behavior trumps your argument. And this is why when people say there's no such thing as UPB, they're making an argument that is universally preferable behavior to accept things that are true and reject things that are false. And if you say there's no such, you must stop believing in universally preferable behavior because it's false, that's universally preferable behavior, right? They have to slow down, look at their actions.
You must stop believing in...
Slowing down and looking at your actions is tough because, you see, you can make up whatever crap you want in your arguments, but your behavior, by their deeds shall you know them. Actions speak louder than words. This is the way to remember this. Actions speak louder than words. If you're...
No, you can't talk about actions. So now you're venturing into actions because that's the direct, connection with objects in the real world, right? But no, it is called universally preferable behavior, right? So you have to stick with interpretation of action, not the action. You're violating your own fucking system here, right? And this is not the first time I pointed this out. I pointed out several times that he sort of jumps into actions and say, and this is going on, and then back to behavior, right? Bullshit, right? Fucking bullshit.
Sending me an email saying emails never get delivered. I don't care about your argument. I just look at your actions. But sophists always want to keep you focused on language rather than have you evaluate their actions.
Yeah, exactly. And you're all about language, aren't you?
Language can be manipulated. Actions are empirical. And it's really frustrating for people who are used...
Yeah, actions are empirical. Well, I would say not really. Because drinking, what color does drinking have, right? What smell does it have? What sound does it have? What feel does it have? What taste does it have? Drinking has none of these, right? But orange juice has, right? This bottle has these aspects, but drinking doesn't. So drinking as a behavior, and I'm even violating my own understanding here. If you're talking behavior, is certainly not empirical, but an action is an understanding of the displacement of objects, right? The displacement of the objects you can't experience. You can only, when you have the objects and create that mental picture, register how they move according to each other, right? That movement or change in movement is an interpretation inside you, because you have these sort of this flickering film in front of you, right? There are also 24 frames a minute, or a second, just like a movie, right? You could see that where you get these snapshots, and then they are connected, just like, you could flip the page of drawings and create a moving, just like Disney, right? In the same way that the mind sort of creates this movie, right? And then you can abstract something from that and create sort of stories about moving this, moving that, moving the other, and so on, right? But that interpretation of the action itself is not even empirical. It's the objects that are empirical, right? Because those are the one who has the attributes which are the qualia of the sensual experience.
Manipulating language, when you pause and say, whoa, hang on. Let's look at what you're doing before we bother getting to your argument. Let's look at what you're doing before we bother getting to your argument. What is implied?
But you can't actually, I'm going to be strong with this one, right? You can't look at what you're doing. You can look at the objects and how they move, and you can compare interpretations of those actions, right? And in fact, that's why we have the idea of behaviors, because we are classifying actions, right, into behaviors. Otherwise, we would have to say that when you take that transparent bottle with the blue cap and the red straw with the yellow liquid in it, that, when you move that to, and so on, that would be action. But that's just too complicated. You just call it drinking, right? That's enough information for you to, okay, drinking, right? But those are interpretations, right? The moving of the objects is your first level interpretation of what is going on, or understanding. It's the stepstone between the objects and the understanding of the behavior, right? Okay.
In what it is that you're doing. So when people, they love to get you all tied up in knots about, are the senses valid and how much are they valid, and can they be fooled, and so on. It's like, yes, but you are relying upon my senses to transfer your argument. When you get out of Plato and into Aristotle, so to speak, when you get out of mysticism, the mysticism of language, and into the Baconian scientific empiricism of what people are actually doing, a huge number of philosophical problems can be solved by simply judging the metaphysics and epistemology inherent in what people are actually doing.
Okay, but that goes for you too, right? So you can see my deconstructions of your book, Universal Preferable Behavior and Essential Philosophy and the Art of the Argument, and see all sorts of examples of how he makes these particular flaws which he's mentioning here, where you can see that he contradicts himself, and he used terms in various ways that contradicts earlier use of them, and so on, and misses in the definitions and all sorts of things, right? So he is he's making these flaws left and right.
Magicians always do some trick to keep you looking away from what they're actually doing, right? Like they.
Oh, so it's about, everybody's trying to get you and trick you or something. It's like you just see, trickery everywhere, right? There might, among all these trickery people that you experience, There might be someone who can actually argue decently, at least, right? But you just, everybody's out to trick me. If they don't buy my UPB just like that, it must be because they're out to trick me, right? It's like, come on, man, right? You're sort of paranoid.
Do something dazzling with their right hand so you don't focus on what they're doing with their left hand. And the dazzling thing is just a language. Everybody wants to drag you into this cathedral of language and say, here's where we will joust.
Well, the smart sophist, just like Stefan Molyneux, would point out that those who are bad at using language are bad philosophers. But he's so good at using language that he can convince you that he's not using language to philosophize, by pointing out those who are worse than him at using language to do philosophy, right? So he's a master sophist, making you think he's a philosopher by pointing out those who are bad at being sophists. See my point? That's sort of high-level sophistry.
The argument is, no. Let's look at what you're doing first. We will solve most problems by relying on the empiricism of your actions. So when people start to tell you that, there's no such thing as UPB is invalid, there's no such thing as morality, blah, 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 you want to, and I, of course, we want to be dragged into that language land where we're jousting with these clouds of language and meaning and definition and so on. And I think one of the things that's really helpful about UPB is to say, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Because arguments, universals unconnected to empiricism are mysticism defined. Universals unconnected to empiricism are mysticism defined.
Jamen, but a universal is not empirical, right? You need to understand, universality, what color does universality have? What smell does it have? What taste does it have? It does none of these, right? So it's a mental construct of some kind, right? So you're contradicting you can't talk about empiricism when you're talking about universality, right? Empiricism is there are sensual data, qualia, when I'm referring to my knowledge. And I'm saying that's an elephant. There needs to be at least one of the senses, right? The qualia, at least one of the senses, right? There has to be a color or something like that. Okay, at that point I can say, well, does it have a color? Yes, then it's empirical. If you're saying universality is empirical, okay, then I test whether or not it's empirical. I'd say, does it have a color? Or does it have a taste? Does it have a smell? And so on, right? It has none of these. So universality is not empirical. It's quite easy, right? But you're one of those who just, throwing around words and it sounds so great, right?
The empiricism of action is where we build UPB from. Now, people may genuinely not believe in universally preferable behavior or may avoid the topic or may never chime in or whatever. Okay, but that we have no idea what they think or don't think because they're never participating in the argument or the debate. The moment they start participating in the argument or the debate, they're UPB. Arguing against, arguing for, that's UPB.
So you're ruling out mute people. Or lost their voice or their horse or something, whatever, right? So they can't, so they're, but why do you need a debate? You should be able to figure out in your own accord without debating whether or not your thinking can result in some kind of moral principle. You should be able to do that philosophically, not by debating. Philosophy and debating are two different things, right? You can't rely on, I need somebody to debate with in order to figure out if this is moral or not. That's not how it works, right?
Right there. And getting people to slow down and look at their actions.
Another thing is, those who are bad at arguing, whatever it is you're trying to argue, doesn't prove that you're right. Right? Just because somebody is pointing out a flaw in your argument that isn't there, it's an incorrect pointing to a flaw, that doesn't validate what you're saying, right? If I'm saying that elephant is green and you say, no, it's red. I'm saying, no, it's not red. No, you're wrong. It's not red. Oh, okay, it's not red. Okay, so therefore I'm right. No. It doesn't become green just because somebody else is wrong in calling it red, right? That's another sophist trick. You have to remind yourself, keep your looks out by by pointing out somebody is wrong about something doesn't make that other statement about it automatically correct or right. Okay.
Really stressful for people because you're taking away a power that they want. They want this power.
Oh yeah, they want this. They come crawling, these edgelords. They want to destroy my ethics and help me defend the ethics. Yes, my acolytes, we are going to fight the edgelords. Right?
To have language disconnected from actions, because then it's so easy to manipulate. It's sort of like reading palms is easy. Biology is hard. Being a psychic is easy. Being a physicist is hard.
It's just, then when it goes on these, it feels like a preacher, right? It feels like, a sermon of some kind, right? It doesn't feel like he wants to enlighten you in his philosophical thinking. It's more like a sermon or a political speech or something like that. It doesn't feel like philosophy. It's like he's using words to sort of get under the tint under the nose or nose under the tint or whatever. He's sort of trying to manipulate it. It's like, get the fuck away from me with that, right? Give me some straight up philosophy.
And this actually comes from very sort of personal experience for myself when I did 2 years of an English degree. And I sort of very clearly remember, I just had the same issue with psychohistory when I was sort of back in contact with Lloyd Demar's. And when I remember analyzing a section of John Fowles' The Magus, which is actually quite an influential book for me. And I just remember thinking, look, I'm convincing enough and strong enough at language that I can make just about any case. And it's going to be fairly compelling.
I can make any case? Doesn't it just make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside that he can make any case? Right? So how do you know this case is the right case if you can make any case? Right? How do you know he's just not making the case he wants to make because it's somehow beneficial to him rather than some other case that might be more correct than this case he's making, right? He can make any case. He just said he's a sophist, right? Listen to what he's saying, right?
But there's no facts behind any of it. There's no facts behind it. I believe this character represents this, and I believe this theme represents that. And it's like, okay, can it be disproven? Which is why, after I went to theater school, I couldn't go back into an English degree. Even though I love to read, I love to write, and so on, I switched to history because then I thought, okay, at least here's some facts. Not many, but there's some facts. So I can.
History can never be a fact, right? History is about the past. You can't experience the past, so there can't be any facts. There can only be evidence, right? Like fossils or, written text or something. Those are not facts. The fact is the book. But that's not what you're going for in the history. Then you're going to understand what is written in the book. But the reference of the written thing in the book is not the fact itself. That you write, apple on a piece of paper doesn't make apple a fact, right? So you don't even understand the difference between now and the past, and facts and understanding of knowledge and so on. So it's very deep waters you're going into where you don't understand what you're saying.
Be wrong, I can be right. I can make a case based.
And why the hell would you want to study history when you're a philosophy guy, right? If you're so smart and whatever, right? Why didn't you go into philosophy? Was it because you weren't allowed into philosophy and now you're just sugarcoating things and saying, well, I went into history because I want facts and so on, facts better than, I don't believe it. I simply don't believe it, right? If I know that once I was going to university I wanted to study computers, but my degrees were not good enough to go to study computers. But one way I could do it, but as a major subject, right? I could take mathematics as a major subject in order to take computers as a minor subject. So I could make my minor subject my major subject somehow, right? Maybe that was because you couldn't get into philosophy. So you have to take history and then focus on the history of philosophy, right?
Not just on my ability to persuade, but on some reference to empirical facts, source documents, and so on. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's this, people want to draw you into this overcomplication. And when you slow down to them and say, what is implied in the empiricism of your actions? That's really, what is implied in the empirical?
That's an interpretation again. That's an interpretation of behaviors, right? Or actions. It's an interpretation of what is going on, right? It's something that is implied. It's not empiricism. What empiricism is implied, it's a contradictory statement. You're so full of shit, man. You don't understand what you're saying. You're just spouting this as and your peers, your acolytes, are apparently so little versed in philosophy or argumentation that they don't spot these errors you're presenting, right?
Of your actions. And if people can do that, fantastic. They can say, okay, well, wait, I am correcting you according to a standard that is not personal.
I am correcting you. Now we're talking about correcting. What is that? I'm getting a little lost in this. If you're behaving some way, let's say you're making an action, and you are interpreting that yourself as a certain kind of behavior, and you argue for that behavior, you're saying, I am drinking, and then I will correct you and say, no, you are eating. Is that what we are dealing with? Why would I do that? Okay, I might want to do it. I mean, okay, let's say I want to say, I don't think you are drinking, I think you're eating, right? But what is this necessity in making a contrary statement or saying you're not doing this, you are doing that instead, right? Why would I not just say, well, the guy's crazy, right? Why would I engage? It's like it gets more and more convoluted and fluffy and like he's just going to label stuff this way and therefore UPB and therefore I can tell you what is right or wrong. It's sort of the argument has become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's only the words left, right? Nobody understands a fucking thing he's talking about when compared to reality. And I have pointed out all these flaws in his description of or connection with reality, which he basically says is empiricism, right? But empiricism is a way of understanding when you have knowledge and when you don't have knowledge, right? So when he's talking about things that doesn't have a sound or a taste or a color or anything like that, well, he's not talking about something that is empirical, right? So it doesn't hang together, right?
And if somebody says to you, Queen is a better band than Led Zeppelin, right?
A better is not something you experience, right? It's not empirical experience, at least, right? You can't say, well, see, that is better on Queen. So, and you can see that better is that's blue, right? Does better have a color? It's an interpretation or emotional response to the music, right? To the sounds. So it's not something that you can point to. So it can't be empirical. So why are you talking about this, right?
Well, it depends if you want to be happy or satanic, I suppose. Or you want to be satanic, then Led Zeppelin is a much better band. But that they would not appeal to universal principles as a whole, right? Now, you could say Freddie Mercury is a better singer than Mark.
Universal principles. This universality is starting to get on my nerves, right? It's like he just keeps saying universal. It's not universal. It's not this. It's not that. It has to be universal. It's like, who gives a crap whether or not you think it's universal or not, right? I'm on the other side of the globe. But you're no help of mine, right? You can't help me in anything with whatever words you are spouting here, right? It's like I can't think of a situation, or no matter what situation I try to imagine, how would I go about thinking about it being universal or not, right? if I have to establish some kind of ethics, what would be, other than the statement I make that is wrong and that is right, but what I'm referring to is also always a local thing. It's always this particular situation, which is gone now, right? So is it universal? Well, now it's gone. I can't even look at it anymore, right? So what the hell do I do in reality, right? These sort of technical terms and sort of juggling of words doesn't solve anything, right? It just makes it possibly sound valid or sound like you're onto something, right? But I can't, when I deconstruct it, I can't see anything. I can't freaking see anything that I can use for anything in my daily life, right?
Yeah, and Freddie Mercury did folk as well, and Bob Dylan didn't do Somebody to Love, right? Couldn't in a million years. And when you are dealing with subjective aesthetic preferences, then nobody says...
Okay, so he at least understands that Queen being good is a subjective kind of aesthetics. Okay, so far so good.
Just wrong. Now, you could say, I don't know, Prince is a better guitarist than Tom Petty or Jeff Lynne. Why? Because...
So now he's name dropping. I'm so much into music, yes. Except that he mentions Queen all the time, right? And then Sting, and then Pink Floyd, basically the bands he apparently listens to, right? Maybe you want to switch a bit away from Queen, right? It gets a bit boring in the long run, right?
Prince rocked an incredible...
I might mention that I've been a Queen fan since around 1981 or something like that. So I think I heard the first Queen track around 81, around the Hot Space album. So...
guitar solo with the George Harrison tribute, and they gave it to him. And I think Eric Clapton, when he was asked, are you the best guitarist? He said, I don't know, but go ask Prince. Right? He was an amazing guitarist. So when people are telling you that you are incorrect and there's nothing personal about it, there's nothing subjective about it, you're objectively incorrect, then you have to look at the empiricism of what they're doing in the argument. Getting people to slow down and look at the empiricism, we have a great resistance to it because, of course, a lot of the people who come in and go against UPB are threatened by UPB and hostile towards UPB. Why?
It's because they're hostile. They can't argue against it because it's perfect. So it must be because they're against it. They're just nasty and want to pull it down, right? It's a sign of narcissism. And sort of, he has this megalomania aspect, which is a almost surefire indicator of narcissism, right? And narcissism can often arrive from people who have had some kind of attachment issues in their childhood. Basic from between 1 and 5 years old, right? There has been some kind of attachment issues, and it's very likely he has had that because of his upbringing with his fucking crazy mother, right? Who didn't apparently care very much for her children, right? And the father was kicked out to South Africa, something like that. So there's very likely he has some attachment issues, right? And that creates some kind of megalomania. That's very common among narcissists, as far as I understand, from what I have gathered from psychologists who speak about these things, right? And they are clinging to their understanding of the world, right? It has to be right, otherwise their inner lack of personality will crumble, because it's sort of a smoke screen of having an inner personality, that they are defending their inner personality rather than arguing rigidly for the philosophy or whatever else it is that they believe in, right? All these cult figures throughout history have all had some kind of antisocial something behavior, right? So it's not very strong. I think in He's very good with words, right? So he's good at covering up and pretending that there's nothing to see here, right? But it gets more and more crampy for him to argue for his ethics, right? He's trying to, all the ways he has figured out in his head how he could argue for UPB. It's sort of, it gets reduced and reduced and reduced, and nobody seems to be interested in having anything to do with him, right? All these friends he had, what was it that Christian guy he was talking with? There was that Bill Whittle, I think. There was this Scott guy with the drawings, and there were a lot of people a few years ago. He was, and I'm a good friend in the studio, and now we are going to talk about this. There's no friends anymore, right? That might be a pointer that those people he gets in contact with start to retract when he gets sort of weird, right? What about that guy he had, Mike? Mike was on the show until sometime in 2017. You might correct me if I'm wrong. I believe, and he was a very, sounds like a nice guy, and he was, very pro the philosophy and so on. And he had sort of also, I think, a German producer, something with a dialect or with an accent, right? And all of a sudden, they disappeared out of the system. Just out of the blue, there was no producer and there was no mic. Where did they go, right? Why did they disappear all of a sudden? If they're such a great show and they like philosophy and so on, and then they disappear, right? Just around the time when he's starting to support, Trump, right? Things are going on behind the lines that you don't hear about, right? He's covering them up, right? And he's sort of removing the evidence, I think, to some extent, right? Because he has to make this pretense of being a great philosopher, but he might actually start to sense that people are onto him, right? I have seen a lot of critical and decently critical videos that sort of tries to take him down and say, well, maybe not exactly take him down, but pointing out flaws in his philosophy at least, right? And maybe the most prominent one is rationality rules. And he did it in sort of a goofy teenager millennial kind of way, right? Which might not be the best way to go, right? But, whatever.
As UPB takes away their ability to use language as a manipulation tactic. It takes away their ability. Bullshit.
It takes away, listen, my congregation, it takes away, and then it has to be. Just like when I was 6 years old in church, and the guy in the bucket told me and talked this way, and he sort of convinced people that he was right, and he was priesting, and he was sermoning, and whatever it's called. He talks like a fucking priest, right?
Because once you look and demand that other people look
Then
at
sort of he escalates his, he raises, he says, and then he starts, and this is the wrong, the right one and the wrong one, and sort of, right, sophist trick.
System of their actions and everything that's implied therein.
And it's also a kind of threatening people into submission, right? They sense deep down that they are being threatened. This slight, small threat that if you don't comply with what I'm saying, you're being kicked out of my cult, right? That's how they work, these people who are narcissists and manipulators. They are getting under your skin. They are luring you in with something you want, and then they are threatening you into submission. And because you are so wedded to them as a personality, you are afraid of disconnecting yourself because you want what they have. But then they're going to use you, right? That's what they do, these kind of sophists.
You are taking away what most people use language for. Most people use language to control, extract resources, manipulate, subjugate, praise, flatter. It's a resource transfer mechanism. It's why we developed such amazing language
jumping a
skills
little ahead here.
Taking away their power. And they can't ask people, explain UPB to me
No. So now you are telling people to just implicitly, you are telling people to accept UPP just like that and make other people argue for why it's wrong. And then you can sort of implicitly tell them to say, well, when they say this, you can tell them that they're wrong. And because they're wrong, you must be right. Therefore, UPP is right? It's all so fucking sophist. You're being manipulated, right? Go out, my disciples. You have heard I have spoken, right? Go out and ask people this, and if say that, they're wrong and you're right and I'm right and we are together, right? My congregation.
Like I'm 5 years old, because you can. I did the ABCs of UPP like 12 or 13 years ago. How to explain UPP to kids.
How to explain UPP for kids? I need to check that out. ABC of UPP. Oh, how nice. How child-friendly. Yeah, maybe I'm. This is a philosophy show, so you have to be patient, okay? I just have to search a little more here to see if I can get ABCs of UPP. Okay, I'm keeping this on the back burner, right? So I might take a stab at that at some point. Okay, let's see what happens.
So ask people. Okay, explain it to me. Do you understand the theory? Because if you oppose based resource extractors through manipulation.
And I want to say, but because it's so difficult to understand what the hell he's talking about, right? People would just say, okay, he says I have to go out and ask people about UPP. Yes. And if they say this, it's wrong because Stefan Molyneux says it. Yes. Because he's the big philosophy guy, right? Come the fuck on, man. Are you going to go with this? Don't do that, man. Think for yourself, right? Don't be his little, disciple or a little, waiter or jester going out in the world because he says so. Stop that. Stop that.
Then they will be incredibly hostile to empiricism, which takes away their capacity to control others and extract resources through language. So I just wanted to mention that as a sort of
extract resources. All of a sudden now it's about extracting resources. So people are out to get you and destroy your pull down UPP because they're out to get resources. They're actually out to steal from you. Be aware, they want to steal from you. That's why they don't like UPP. And that's why UPP is good. Because then you won't get... Oh, man. Holy shit, this is sophistry, right? This has nothing, and I repeat, nothing to do with philosophy, right? It's nothing to do with philosophy. This is not philosophy. This is pure sophistry, okay? And when you deconstruct the arguments, there's nothing there. It's all bullshit. It doesn't hang together. He's just spouting left and right, and it sounds great maybe, but it doesn't work. It doesn't hang together. It's not argued well, right? It's bullshit. So the rest of it is just sophistry, right? Trying to lure you in with this preacher speech. So don't buy it, right?
A good way of maybe pushing back against some of this stuff. And man, I'm doing great work these days. I really am. So I just want to mention that. If you have any questions.
Yeah, but because nobody else is saying it. You have to say it yourself. I'm doing such great work at the moment. I'm just on top of my game, right? Hear him talk about himself, how great he is, right? It's megalomania, right? It's just grandiosity. Goddamn, I'm great. It's like, come the fuck on. Who the hell would listen to a stupid guy like this, right? Absorbed with his own greatness, right? Goddamn, I'm rolling this. Holy shit.
Comments, I'm happy to hear.
I have an anecdote that I wasn't...
So I think I'm going to cut off here because I don't want those listeners to be a part of the show. So it's just like, I mean, if you're a Molyneux fan, right? That's the best term you can, because they can't be philosophers, right? Then they would say, whoa, wait a second here, right? I'm so fucking great. Damn, I'm doing great at this. Holy fuck, right? That's what very good sophists or narcissists, they will inevitably at some point let it slip, right? You have to look for these moments when they say, oh, god damn, I'm great, right? When they say things like that, you know it's a narcissist you're dealing with, right? Because nobody, you could, if I was saying, well, if I had finished my book, right? I might say, okay, I've been working on this for 6 years, whatever, right? And I've fucking rewritten, and I'm so happy that I'm finally got to a result I'm satisfied with. I think it's good enough to go to the editor, whatever, right? But I wouldn't just say, god damn, I'm great. I finished the book and god damn, it's great, right? Why would I say that? Because it's empty. There's nothing in that. Saying you're great is such an empty understanding of yourself, because there is no personality in it. There's nothing in it. You're nothing. Saying you're great is the same as saying, I don't have anything. I'm nothing. I can't argue rigidly. I'm not a philosopher. I'm an imposter, right? Saying that you're great is the most empty statement in the fucking universe, right? There's no argument, right? Man. See you in the next one. Give me a comment. Tell me what you think of this. And otherwise, subscribe if you think this is good philosophy, or at least good deconstruction of bad philosophy, I should say. Give me a comment, give me a like, give me a subscribe, whatever. Otherwise, see you next time.